Hi, Govin here. Before we dive in, I want to let you know that you're listening to a special edition of Paper Napkin Wisdom, the Freedom Framework series built around a new book by Michael Walsh. In this series, Michael and I explore what it really takes to build a business that works for you, not the other way around. We're talking about freedom in your business, freedom from your business, and freedom because of your business. We'll talk about what each of those things mean. Each episode brings you tools, insights, and in-depth conversation between Michael and I about how to bring this kind of freedom into your life. If you're ready to design a business that you don't need to escape from, you're in the right place. Listen in.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govin Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govin Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 274. If you're new to the show, this is where leaders, difference makers, and everyday visionaries share the one thought or scribble that changed everything for them, all on the humble canvas of a paper napkin. Each conversation is a chance for you to uncover a fresh insight, apply it, and watch your world shift. Today, we're rolling into part 12 of our Freedom by Design series with business growth strategist Michael Walsh. Over 3 decades, Michael has guided founders from kitchen table startups to globally scaled enterprises, always keeping one North Star in sight: building a business that serves your life, not the other way around. In this chapter, he's bringing a brand new napkin, one that invites you to rethink how you lead the leaders inside your company. Just imagine what might happen when the leadership team suddenly transform from taskmasters to growth catalysts. Notice how roles evolve when they become that kind of boss. As you listen, allow yourself to wonder, where could a subtle shift in your management style unlock exponential freedom for you and for your team? Now settle back and let's explore what Michael has uncovered. Let's listen in. Michael Walsh, welcome back to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to continue the series with you today.
Excellent.
All right. So we've been talking about teams a lot. We've been talking about, training and growing your people, understanding, and I think this fundamental thing is that the core of your company used to be perceived as generating profit and generating customer value. We've added this third dimension around professional growth, but the team have to be part of the results in order that to exist. And we talked about a number of things that related to that. And after talking about teams, we started talking about this idea of managers. And we just sort of touched on that last episode. And we're getting into growing your managers because teams need managers. Teams need leadership. And today's napkin is about growing your managers. And it says, grow managers, best boss dash worst boss. And here's the best part. Do bad bosses know they're bad? And that's a great question. So kick us off there. Why did you share this one with me?
Well, because there's a few things, right? Because first of all, there's this whole conundrum around management. The truth is that being a middle manager is probably the toughest job in any company. I mean, quite often people have multiple bosses, multiple employees, and nobody listens. They're expected to do a whole bunch of things, and they figure, well, your job, your people, so just handle it. And so people actually are not trained for management, yet they're expected to perform, and it has such a huge impact on everything that happens in a company, especially a service-based company that's driven by the expertise of their people. That is your deliverable.
And so think about the reason why managers at this middle level become managers is usually because they're really good at doing the job.
Right.
It's not that they're really good at being managers. It's just they're really good at being in the job. So they think, because you're so good at being in the job, we'll just make you in charge of a bunch of people who are doing this work.
Well,
right?
And from one perspective, it makes sense because it's like, well, I trust this person to get the job done. So with themselves, then they're probably the one I would trust most to work with my team to get the results because I do have that level of trust and confidence in them. And it's misplaced.
Yeah, and not only is it misplaced, but uh, going backward, we're not training them for the results we want because the results are different when
Right.
you're in that role.
Well, in fact, that's exactly why it's misplaced. You're absolutely right. Here's the thing. The skills it takes to deliver a result are very different from the skills it takes to support somebody else to generate the result. And so, and the chasm between 20th century business operations and 21st century business operations is probably the widest here. This is the place it shows up the most. So when we talked in earlier about the difference between a well-oiled machine and an intelligent ecosystem, where it lands is smack dab in the middle of the lap of the person who's in management.
Right. Right. Now, I think that there's so what goes into being a best boss? Let's start aspirationally, right?
Okay, well, I know.
You're going to go the other way.
No, I'm not going to go the other way. I'm going to take a step back and add a few things first. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is let's define management, because people don't know what management is. So I have a definition that I actually use in the book. It's to take talents of people and turn them into performance, basically. So to take the talent of people and turn it into performance. There's a lot of different people have done definitions, and I believe that one I got from Marcus Buckingham. Of course, Buckingham was one of the lead people at the Gallup organization when they were doing all their employment engagement things. And then he's since opened his own internationally renowned research company. And everything he does is based on not anecdotal information, but empirical data. So what he's done, and he's saying, listen, if you define managers as people who take talents of people and turn it into performance, like, okay, that's fine. But just because you have working definition doesn't get the clarity. Here's one of the things we've got management training workshops and leadership development workshops, things like that. And in my management training workshop, one of the things we get people to do is I give them a couple of minutes and I said, write down the name. And usually it's the initials because they're afraid of somebody sitting next to them reading off their notes or whatever, of the best boss you've ever worked for. Who's the best boss you worked for? And then the exercise is what made them the best. Okay. And we've got a whole bunch of criteria that we've come up with, or that they have come up with, and over a period of time, what you find is no matter what the group, they tend to come up with very similar things in terms of what made what made the best boss the best boss. And I have a list here. Things like this: clear, simple communication. They were consistent, respectful, encouraging of my ideas, has a vision, empowering, trusted me and provided independence, not overly emotional, patient, caring advocate, never is out of control. In other words, they're calm, protective of the team, they're authentic. They have time for my questions. They provide a mentorship, celebrates milestones, and they said preferably through beer. Help me lead. Right. They helped me to lead to my own conclusions. They were inspiring. They considered other people's opinions, no matter who that person might be. They pushed people out of their comfort zone. They walked the talk. They had good sense of humor. They structured my role for me. I actually enjoyed their work. They're enthusiastic, results focused, not micromanaging, transparent, acknowledged good work. They were approachable and available, fair, provide feedback, both good and bad, and valued, aligned. Our values were aligned, and they basically just made me feel good. So now that was across a number of different people, obviously, in the same workshop. And each time we do this workshop, we get versions of this, as far as that's concerned. And so it was fascinating because that was part one of the exercise. Now, there is a part two of the exercise, and I said, well, who was the worst boss? Mm-hmm. And what made them the worst boss? So we might as well put the two together, and then we'll look at the difference, not just like what makes the best, because we might as well contrast it. And so here's a smattering of the lists that I got from people, because we talked about them. We'll put them on whiteboards. And we yak it through, sort of thing. But they didn't effectively use my timer skills. They were condescending. They took credit for my work, micromanaging. Things that were inconsequential. They liked being a boss more than getting a job done. They provided no context for tasks. They encouraged internal division. poor at time management skills, didn't fully understand what my job actually was and what it was required to do, being absent or withdrawn, can't be trusted to keep their word, indecisive or not making clear decisions, not taking a stand on things, unpredictable, reactionary, not forward thinking. One person said childish, manipulative of other people, too busy, technically incapable. Good results. If there were good results, they did it. If it was anything was wrong, it was your fault. Self-important, not flexible or open to new ideas, made me tacked on, not really part of a team, allowed unacceptable behavior. One person said he doesn't respect me. Their outward values just don't align. And another one was the boss was not engaged. The boss was a tack on to the team. Not on top of the project goals, unclear communication, flat out disrespectful, negative language and attitude, secretive, visibly stressed all the time, or doesn't trust me to try new things. So that's what the worst boss, the criteria we had for the worst boss, So it was interesting because you have comments, I can see. Go ahead.
No. I think it's really interesting how how many parallels there are, right? I mean, there are almost point counterpoints for most of these things.
Yeah. And the thing that I found is the best bosses see their job and see their people differently from the worst bosses. They just see the job differently. They also see the people differently. Best bosses tend to listen to their people. They focus on the strengths of the people. They focus on what might make them better, and they actually foster their growth. They realize that you can catch more flies with honey than you can vinegar. They really are looking for ways to bolster people up and really get them working at their best things. The worst ones seem to drive over people and to get what they want, or they disregard them completely, or they feel like they had to harness them and try to get them to do things as opposed to working with them. And so it was interesting to see that.
I also thought it was really interesting that in the best boss, one of the first points was clarity of communication, not just communication, but the clarity of communication. And then I thought, and transparency came up a lot early on as well in that list of best bosses, and I find that it's not that best bosses are less demanding than bad bosses or the worst bosses. In fact, that may not be the case at all. I think it's just simply that they're clear about what they're saying and they are willing to be transparent about what winning really looks like. They actually know what winning looks like. They are able to communicate that with you. They're able to show you how to get there, right?
Right. And by contrast, the worst bosses, a lot of them they were uncertain, unclear, and didn't provide the direction that the people were looking for in some cases, or the support when the person had the direction, sorted out, as far as that's concerned. So it's been interesting. And the other thing, there's two different. Remember, we've talked about a 20th century model based on a well-oiled machine. And we've also talked about a 21st century model based on an intelligent ecosystem. In a well-oiled machine, it's there for the benefit of the owners and the people that use the machine. Whereas if I'm part of a well-oiled machine, I'm actually part of that machine. So the machine may be used for the people who use it and or the owners, but I'm actually part of the machine. I'm just sort of a conduit in that machine. Whereas in an ecosystem, it's there for everybody who's part of that ecosystem. And the difference as it shows up in management is very simply the difference between prescribed power and trying to get people what you want them to do, or using power of influence, which is guiding people, but actually based on credibility of that you've earned as opposed to something that the position has given you. You see, one person could guide me, and if I don't trust that person, they might have to enforce their notion on me for me to accept it. And I don't even accept it except to their face. So I'll do it while they're there, but if they're not there, I'm not going to be doing it. Whereas if it's power of influence, Somebody may still guide me or make a suggestion or do something, but you know what? I trust them because I know they've done it. I know that they actually treat me like a human being. And as a result, I've got more, all the time in the world for somebody that actually is interested in my growth and my development. But keep in mind that people don't care what you know until they feel understood by you. So if I feel understood and I feel like you see me and hear me, then I have all the time in the world for what you share with me because I know you understand me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I don't get that you understand me, you're just sort of doing something for the company that I have to become part of. That's when I really do feel like a cog in the system. And I'm in a situation where either I go begrudgingly, or even if I go as a good soldier, you don't have my brain at the table. All you've got is my willingness to follow an order. And that puts a lot of pressure on the manager. Frankly, it's actually harder to be a manager if you don't get the people's, and I won't say get their buy-in like it's this thing to get, but if people don't want to work with you, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting when you see.
Let's back up a little bit though on the credibility they've earned and this idea of influence, because I think those are, the power of influence. And good leaders influence their teams as opposed to command and control them is clear. But the question is, how do they influence their teams? And I think that there are formulas for this, and it starts off quite interestingly with being interested in the person, interested in what they're doing, interested in their perspective. Right? Doesn't it start off with curiosity as opposed to anything else?
So does curiosity play a large factor? Sure. I totally agree.
Okay.
Okay, so do you want me to point out the trap you're heading towards?
Sure. Because
you're heading towards a trap. Because here's what you're trying to do: is you're trying to identify what are the criteria on that, and I'm saying that place will get you in trouble. So I have an alternative that
sure
that actually keeps you out of trouble. Okay. So first of all, what I would say is context gives you a whole different perspective on content. So if I were to ask you, what is your favorite fruit? Okay. Or I'd just say, what's the best fruit? What would you say?
Apples.
Okay. Do you know if I asked 10 people, I'd get 8 answers?
Probably. You might get 12.
Dude, apples or oranges, right? And it's all about apples and oranges. Whereas if I said, what's the best fruit for vitamin C? What would you say?
Lemons.
Okay. So 8 out of 10 would say some sort of citrus, and 7 of those 8 would say oranges.
Yes.
What's the best fruit if you're going running?
None.
None? You're one of the 2 out of 10. 8 out of 10 are going to say banana.
Yes.
Okay. But what you find is that is the context. You see, if I don't say what's the best fruit? Best fruit for what?
For what?
Yeah. See, so the problem is what are the, what's the formula? Well, the problem is the formula is this thing. It depends on the perspective. What if what you did was you said, you know what? Here's the perspective to look from if I'm a manager. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why I said curiosity. So here's where
I understand that. So that's why I didn't say you were already in the trap. I agree with you.
Yeah. So because I was at connection. Okay. So connection before context, before content. So,
yeah, but even connection sounds like a to-do for me.
It's a what?
A to-do.
Well, no, meaning that as a manager, I think the first thing that we can't challenge anybody, we can't do anything with anybody, period, unless we're connected to them. And the only way to be connected to them is actually to be interested in them. And that goes back to your growth plan, right? Like if it goes back to creating a career development plan and being interested in them, and being interested in them provides a lot of room for a lot of other things.
Okay, so now we're in the context. This is perfect. So that's where I'd go. Is I'd say, you know what? Unless you care about their win, none of the rest of it matters. If I care about them, I don't actually worry about what I say, what I do. And if I'm interested in what would actually have them maximize their own success in career development, if I actually take an honest interest in that, rather than using a formula, what I do is I go, you know what, I don't know what the formula is. It's going to be different for different people. You have more than one child. Do you raise them the same? The short, big picture, the answer is yes. The small answer is absolutely
not.
It's like what impacts one, that same strategy will not work for the next one, right?
Well, and the first kid was the first kid. There were no other kids around. Then all of a sudden, the second one came along, and there were two kids. And then the third one came along, and then there were three. So they can't possibly have the same dynamic.
And do you know that's
as much as we'd like to?
That's also true, even if you have twins. Yeah, but there's 7 minutes between them.
Exactly.
It's still true. It's still true. And you might have a little bit more in common, but it's interesting to see. So if you actually take an interest, see if somebody isn't interested in the growth of their people, keep them away from management. And this is one of the mistakes people make when they're growing their business. They figure, and a lot of people say, well, if I want to maximize my personal earnings, I have to go into management because that's what'll help me best feed my family. And if the best revenue comes from being a manager, then that means everybody's going to steer for it, whether or not they're really, inclined for that. If somebody else is really better as a specialist, but they're not very good as a manager, they'll still go to management because that's what gives them a maximum paycheck. Whereas if I make a specialist, as I'm growing, if I make a specialist just as, if not more rewarding for the person who really brings something unique themselves to the table, as I would pay in terms of compensation and all that stuff for a manager, like I really have to treat them as two separate career paths. And if I treat them as two separate career paths, I'm in good shape. If I don't, then I'm going to get people gearing towards management for the money because that's what gives them the maximum money. Now, that said, the context or perspective I look at with regards to management is if you really care about the growth of your people, and you also understand that I'm one person. If I have 6 people working with me, okay, if I do my job halfway decent, the 6 will always outperform the 1. Even if the one person can do 2 or 3 people's works, they can't do 6 people's jobs. And if they can, you're hiring the wrong people.
Absolutely. And I think that, to your point, isn't it that we, on a senior leadership level, often just get how we measure bosses wrong too, because we're not looking at this idea of growing our people. We're looking at finishing the project. And the project, it's all project-related metrics, and there are very few people-related metrics.
Now, that doesn't mean sit around in a circle and sing Kumbaya with somebody playing the guitar and we got a pony.
No way.
But what it does mean, well, here's the thing.
And it certainly doesn't mean pizza carts on the every day, right? I mean, we're not talking about.
Yeah. So you can actually be very strategic about this, but here's the other side of it. We're actually lousy at measuring our effectiveness as a boss.
Yeah.
So I've got a Gallup stat for you. Gallup's done so many different stats. I mean, they originally, their original employee engagement surveys were with 1 million employees and 80,000 managers. And then they did a part 2 on that. And that was longitudinal studies. I think it was between 77 and 91 or something. And then they came up with their book, First Break All the Rules, in, I believe it was 92 or 93. But then they continued on with their studies and they grew it to over 2 million employees and over 150,000 managers. And one of the things they found was that people just don't know if they're any good. They said about 10% of managers are great managers, but only 10%. However, when surveyed, 71% of all managers placed themselves in the top 20% of all managers.
71%.
71% place themselves in the top 20%. In other words, nobody knows. They think, well, I care, so I must be a good manager because I know
I'm putting in 80 hours a week.
And I know how to speak to people, and I understand the job. And we get the projects across the line, so I must be a great manager. I don't know if I'm top 10%, but I'm certainly top 20. So it's fascinating to see that. And the truth is, we have no idea.
Mm-hmm. So how do we measure it?
That's a great conversation for an upcoming paper napkin coming to you.
All right. Okay, before we get into how do we measure it,
yeah,
and all of those things, let's finish this thought. Do bad bosses know they're bad? Do good bosses know they're good?
Well, it's interesting because most bad bosses don't know they're bad. They don't actually realize they're as bad as they are.
Yeah.
Okay. And because I've been I've been in groups with 40 managers I'm training at the same time. Anywhere from 10 to 40, depends on, actually the highest number I think was about 68 or 70 managers, because we put a few companies together in the same system. And they started reading what they themselves had said about good bosses and bad bosses. And half of them in the room, they're like, oh my God, I do some of these things in the bad boss list. And they're mortified, thinking maybe I'm a horrible manager after all. And, it was fast. I said, don't worry about it. We'll teach you the skills so you can get past that. And it's like, it was like a little bit of a crisis moment that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. Because they don't realize, well, yeah, there's that. And then, well, wow. And people are calling this their worst boss. So it was fascinating to see. Invariably, the minute you have over 20 people in the same room looking at that, you'll have at least one who wants to quit.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the program. They want to quit management. They're like,
Yeah.
hey, but don't worry, all is not lost. There's different ways of looking at this. Because the truth is, people just aren't trained in it. We assume that because we're good with people, we know how to manage. Well, okay, so Wayne Gretzky, one of the best hockey players all time ever. I mean, I've never seen him below number 3 on anybody's list. Okay. He couldn't coach himself out of a paper bag. I mean, he got fired inside of 2 years with Phoenix Coyotes when he was a coach there. He had such a strong intuitive skill that didn't translate into his coaching ability. Whereas when you had Larry Robinson and Jacques Lemaire, 2 defensemen from the Montreal Canadiens, who actually ended up being coaches together with the New Jersey Devils I believe it was in the 80s, they were brilliant coaches. But they had conscious thought of what they were doing, and because they didn't have just the intuition that Gretzky had developed. And so while Gretzky knew for himself, he didn't know how to impart it or teach it or support others to have it. Whereas Robinson and Lemaire, they did. So it's interesting.
And there's also the argument that defenders are smarter than offense.
And that's an argument for people that are that are way above my pay grade. I'm just leaving.
Okay. So I think this is fascinating. Is there anything else we need to do about this napkin before we get into the next conversation when we talk about part 2 on how we actually do this?
Well, the one thing that I would say to complete this thing that we can also use to start the next one is that managers were trained in the 20th century mindset. And fundamentally, while some would argue it didn't even work very well for products, but it clearly doesn't work in a service-based infrastructure or whatever. 78% of all business in North America right now is service-based business. And if in a product-based business, no matter how complicated the algorithm, the inputs are the same and the outcomes are the same, then I can actually break that down and parse it out to people. And the management, I'm the boss, you're the employee, you need to listen to me, is because I could actually give you fixed things to do. In a service-based environment, you need their brain at the table, and the bosses no longer have like all the power as far as that's concerned. So the 20th century mentality of assembly line thinking and everybody has to do their specific, it just doesn't apply anymore, and people don't realize it. And because it's been around since the early 1900s, the start of the 20th century, we think that's all there ever was and all there ever will be. Well, it's just not accurate. And so that's fundamentally one spot where people get stuck. So that would be the last thing I'd say about that.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome.
Thank you for journeying with us today. And an even bigger thank you to Michael Walsh for opening up a space where each of us could reimagine what manager truly means. Michael, your hard-won insight hit like rocket fuel. Key takeaways, and let these settle in. Best boss, worst boss mirrors. When you quietly compare those archetypes, you begin to sense which habits deserve your spotlight. Self-awareness as the first KPI. Notice how feedback, when welcomed, turns blind spots into superpowers. Promotion is not equal to graduation. Imagine promoting only after coaching capacity is proven, not just the technical mastery. Celebrate coach/managers. Perhaps recognition is the fastest way to multiply the behavior you crave. Design freedom through people. As you delegate outcomes, not just tasks, feel the bandwidth for visionary work expand. So now take the next step. Subscribe and review. If today's conversation stirred something in you, hit subscribe and drop a quick review. It helps more freedom-seeking leaders find us. Share the wisdom. Forward this episode to a friend who's ready to grow managers, not just margins. And take our napkin challenge. Grab a napkin right now. Jot one behavior that would move you from okay boss to best boss. Snap a pic and post it with the hashtag #PaperNapkinWisdom. Now reflect on this. What might shift in your team's energy when you treat self-awareness as a daily practice, not an annual event? Until next time, remember, small ideas captured on paper become big results when you focus, align, and act. Keep scribbling, keep sharing, and we'll keep growing together. Make it a great day.